Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment is the latest game in the Legend of Zelda spin-off Warriors series. As a big Zelda fan, I cannot wait to get my hands on this game, especially since the main story is canon to the Legend of Zelda timeline, unlike the previous Hyrule Warriors games. While I do think the story provides a very strong base for the game, it unfortunately causes a problem with the character roster. However, the game greatly exceeded my expectations when it comes to other parts of the game, such as performance. My name is Kenshi, and this is my review of Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment.
Where am I?
If you are new here, my reviews are structured as follows. I start with a basic gameplay overview going over the game's base system mechanics. Then I break my review down into 5 categories: quality, content, art, uniqueness, and fun factor. After describing what I think in each category, I give each category a score out of 10, then total them to give me a final score. Now with that out of the way, let's move on to the gameplay overview. This game follows the same basic formula that any Warriors game has. There are hordes of enemies for you to slaughter by completing simple yet effective combos. Every mission has a main objective that often changes during the level. For example, you may start a mission with the objective of capturing an outpost, and once that is done, you are now tasked with defeating a fire moblin that has now appeared on the battlefield. The game structure is very simple, but it really fuels the power fantasy by allowing you to take down hundreds, if not thousands, of monsters effortlessly. One thing that adds more depth to the combat of this game are the Zonai devices. These devices provide new ways to fight against enemy weaknesses. You can also create elemental chains using the Zonai devices, such as using a frost emitter in water or combining a flame emitter with a fan to create a larger and greater effect. Also, elite enemies will often do large attacks that make them flash red. When this happens, you have an opportunity to counter them, either with a unique skill or a Zonai device. Doing this will leave the enemy open for a big punish that can lead to a weak point smash, dealing massive amounts of damage. Speaking of dealing massive amounts of damage, the newly added sync attacks is probably my favorite feature this game offers. Once 2 characters have their sync gauge filled up, you can unleash a sync attack that will feature both characters. There are even some sync attacks that are unique between certain characters. As far as gameplay outside of battle goes, there are quests scattered all across the map that require various different materials for completion. Completing these quests typically provide boosts to your characters, which can come in the form of expanding possible combos and adding new effects to existing combos, or as simple as increasing the amount of health and special attack gauge they have. You can also upgrade your weapons using Zonite Steel, increasing their damage and adding seals to the weapon that provide different benefits. Some characters have a specific weapon they use that cannot be changed, while other characters can use a variety of weapons within the category they are proficient in. Hopefully you have a pretty good understanding of how the game works now, so let's move on to the first category of review: quality. This game is a massive improvement in performance compared to the previous title, Age of Calamity. Among my 50 plus hours of gameplay, I experienced a minuscule amount of stuttering when playing docked, something very unusual for Warriors games. Even in 2-player gameplay, which does run at 30 frames per second instead of 60, I experienced no issues. However, I played for about an hour undocked, and the game did stutter twice from what I recall. It is nothing that ruins the game, but it is something to keep in mind if you primarily play on the go. Returning back to the topic of frames, playing it at 60 frames per second feels extremely good, having put many hours into the previous title. One thing that is very important to mention though is that some of the cutscenes for some reason don't run as smoothly as I would hope. And with them running at 30 frames per second at all times, dropping some frames really hurts that. It doesn't happen all the time, but it is more than I would like. Overall, the game runs very well, but has some issues that keeps the quality away from being amazing. Content. This game has a good amount of content, but the replayability of the game is questionable. There are 24 story missions, 148 side missions, 396 quests, and 185 aside quests to complete. This is enough to keep you busy for about 50 hours, but after that, I have no desire to keep playing the game. Even completing the last few quests that I had was a little boring due to having to play missions that I had already completed. However, every moment before that point I greatly enjoyed. Doing a mission, gathering materials, and then completing a few quests was a very satisfying gameplay loop. It is because I enjoyed the loop so much that I am upset that there isn't more to do. There's not a bad amount of content, it just leaves me hungry for more. I wanted to add one last thing, but I wanted to give a slight spoiler warning about a character that may or may not be playable in Age of Imprisonment. Here's the time to skip to if you don't want to hear what I am about to say. Alright, now that they are gone, why is Sonya not playable? There is literally a spot in the character selection screen for her. She even has a sync attack in the early main missions. I firmly believe she should have been a character unlocked after you beat the main story of the game, but unfortunately, she is not. I am convinced that they are saving her for a post-launch update, but I can't help but question why. Unless she comes with many more missions to complete, I don't see the reason in saving her from being a launch character. But I digress, let's get back to the rest of the review. Art. This game's art is amazing in every way except for one big gripe that I have. Starting with the story, it is very good. Without going into too much detail, I really appreciate the focus on Hyrule being the first king of Hyrule, as well as the prevailing theme of light versus darkness. Moving on to the style of the game, it is incredible. I am a huge fan of the art style introduced in The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, and Age of Imprisonment continues to display how great this style looks. Now coming to the most disappointing part of this game, the characters. Don't get me wrong, Hyrule, the Six Sages, Kalamo, and the Mysterious Construct are all great and interesting characters. However, there are 19 playable characters in this game, and I have only mentioned 9 so far. The other 10 playable characters are all generic characters that have little to no importance to the story of the game. The only character I care somewhat about out of these generic characters is the Gerudo warrior Sholani. Without getting into spoilers, Sholani is the only generic character that has some story importance, hence why she is my favorite out of the bunch. It seems to me that they sacrificed the character roster to make the story canon. While I do prefer that over having a non-canon story, it doesn't excuse the developers for making uninteresting characters that I struggle to care about. It may seem I am being too harsh about the characters, but this is a Warriors game. They are known to have large character rosters. However, the number does not mean much when I don't care about half of the roster. But I do love all of the other art that this game has to offer. Uniqueness. This is a Warriors game. It keeps the same normal attack into strong attack combos that you see in every title. In that regard, it is not unique at all. However, the Zona devices and unique attacks I mentioned in the gameplay overview provide enough depth to the combat that makes it stand out among its predecessors. It kind of reminds me of my time with Persona 5 Strikers, where I am focused on targeting enemy weaknesses, except Age of Imprisonment takes that idea in a different way, allowing you to combine different types of attacks to create new elemental chains. While still not incredibly unique, I don't believe you want the core formula of a warrior-styled game to change as long as it is able to bring in something new to the table. And that is exactly what Age of Imprisonment does. It keeps the things you would expect to see in a Warriors title while adding a welcomed amount of new mechanics to keep the game fresh. Fun factor. This category is a bit difficult for me to review this time around. As I have kind of mentioned in the content section of this review, I had a lot of fun with this game until I beat the final side mission that I had left. Once that was complete, I suddenly didn't want to play the game anymore, and it was a struggle to complete the last few quests. And then when I was done and I had 100% completed the game, all my desire to play the game was gone. Now of course, this bad feeling I got was only in the last couple of hours of playing. The other 48 hours were a blast, so I am going to hold a lot more weight to that. However, I can't ignore this feeling I get from just not wanting to replay any of the content in the game. I played it once and I am done, which is unusual for me as I tend to enjoy many games that are considered grindy and have you repeating the same missions over and over. This aside, the rest of the game is extremely enjoyable. It is very fun to pick up a new character and use their moveset for the first time, as well as using a character you haven't touched in a while, because you may have upgraded their moveset quite a lot, giving you access to many new attacks. On the topic of characters, it is definitely more fun to play as the main characters such as Rauru, the Six Sages, Colombo, and the Mysterious Construct than it is to play any of the generic characters. This is due to the main characters' movesets having a lot more depth and flashy abilities compared to the generic characters. However, the generic characters are still fun to use every now and then because they all have their own unique gimmicks. For example, the Garuda warriors both have a gimmick about timing their strong attacks. By timing your button presses correctly, your attack becomes larger, stronger, and just overall improved, which feels very satisfying to pull off in the heat of battle. This game definitely has a lot of fun to be had. It is just unfortunate that the game falls off quite hard once you get close to 100% completion. I will now give each category a score out of 10. This gives us a final score of 76 out of 100. If you are a fan of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom and enjoy the warrior-styled gameplay, this is a great game to sink your teeth into. However, the game does leave me wanting more in a bad way, and don't even get me started on the characters. The point is, this game is great in many ways, but it also lacks in some important fields. If you are looking for another Nintendo game that was released recently, check out my review on Pokemon Legends ZA. However, if you are looking for a game that is more intense and difficult, check out my review of Wu Chang Fallen Feathers. Also, make sure to subscribe to never miss another review. And of course, have a great rest of your day. Kenshi, signing out.